So this is why I said this was a tough generational question, because what I was thinking about a couple of days ago was look at our parents' generation, and they could easily look at our generation and say, well, we didn't have all that and we turned out fine. And so
you
don't
don't want to
need
be
any of that stuff. Right.
Yeah.
And I can look at younger generation and go, well, I didn't need all that. You don't need all that. But at the same time, this is their lived reality. Right. So
what does that mean? Lived reality. What do you mean by that?
It's the reality that they are living in. For me to say,
isn't just reality. Like, why do we have to label it something that's lived? Isn't just reality?
Boy, you like the big questions, Chris.
I'm trying.
Why do I need that qualifier?
There's terms that I hear that innately make me feel weird. Like, why did we throw lived in experience? Isn't experience, in fact, by the nature of the definition, one that you experience? Like why do we? I mean, I'm not trying to be philosophical. I'm not trying to break down words. It's just interesting to me why I hear these terms sometimes, and I'm kind of like, what is it different than just reality, or does it mean something else that we're all talking about? Like, we think we know what people are talking about, but we don't really know.
So let me put it this way. When I'm saying it's his lived reality, it's not my lived reality at his age.
So it's not. So it wasn't. So wait.
Yeah.
You could say it's his reality.
Yes.
But it wasn't your reality.
It was not my reality. Right.
So what's the function verbally of lived? Hello and welcome to the Griswold Podcast on iCode Media. Today I'm having a great conversation with my friend Dr. Kevin Powers, who I've been trying to have on this podcast for a long time. He's a running buddy of mine. And as I usually do this, I sort of just start with a conversation, but today I'm going to give an introduction before we do our conversation, and I'm sure this is going to be a wonderful discussion. I've actually been waiting for Dr. Powers to come on the podcast for about a year and a half. So I'm excited to do this with him. As always, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, write a review, share it with your friends, and support those who support us. We've been providing myopia control treatments in our practice for years. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, CooperVision has received FDA approval of its innovative MiSight one-day contact lens. This will be the cornerstone of a comprehensive myopia management approach to be offered by CooperVision. This daily wear, single-use contact lens is the first and only FDA-approved product clinically proven to slow the progression of myopia when initially prescribed for children 8 to 12 years old and when compared to children in the control group wearing a single vision one-day contact lens. Check out the show notes for all the specific prescribing details and to get more information about this lens and how you can begin to offer it in your practice. So, Kevin, you and I have talked a lot about kind of the psychology of students specifically, because that's kind of what you do. But
sure.
But before we jump into all of that, kind of because the listeners don't know your history, I asked you to be on here today because I wanted to kind of pick your brain about the psychological aspects of students, both before COVID and after COVID, because you and I talked about that way before COVID. So give us a little bit of background in psychology and what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. So as Chris mentioned, my background's in psychology. I got my doctoral degree, a number of years ago, in clinical psychology, and have spent some time working as a psychologist, doing therapy, doing assessments, things like that, and working with students. Let's see, I want to say this is probably, about a decade or so ago. I actually moved out of doing therapy, doing psychologist, true stereotypically kind of psychologist kind of stuff, and moved towards more academic success related work. So working with students on helping them be successful in the classroom.
Wait, what was the impetus for that? So you're a PhD,
correct?
And there's two different degrees for psychology. pretend like I'm an infant and
Sure,
I have
sure.
no idea the difference between the two.
Sure. So PhD, your doctorate in philosophy, emphasized in psychology. That is a little bit more research based. So you'll do a thesis, you'll do a dissertation, thesis for the master's degree, dissertation for the PhD. The other is what's called a PsyD, doctorate in psychology. That would be I'll call it a clinical degree.
Oh, you said that with such disdain.
It's
But that's typically the difference in path, right? PhDs are probably going to want to do more research in psychology. PsyDs are probably going to want to be more clinicians.
correct.
But either
Can do either.
Right.
Yes. You may see more PhDs in like an academic setting, and PsyDs in more clinical settings, but that does not mean you won't see a PsyD in academia or a PhD working in clinical environments.
So then you were primarily right out of your dissertation.
Mm-hmm.
Did you do a postdoc?
No.
So then you go from your dissertation, you take your board examinations, you
I had
get
to do-
licensed.
I had to do a year internship to get clinical hours to sit for the licensing exam, pass the licensing exam, and then you're a working psychologist.
What type of patients were you seeing when you were in clinical practice?
With students, I was seeing there's a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety. Given the age range, you'd see some adjustment disorders.
Did you limit your practice to younger kids?
I was working primarily just with college age students.
Okay, always.
Yeah. Yes. Well, no, that's not true. And so graduate experience really ranged, really sort of ran the gamut. I mean, I had practical experiences at a juvenile detention center, state psychiatric hospital, substance abuse treatment facility, the university clinic, which operated more like a community mental health center. Excuse me. So all of that was kind of fascinating experience. But I sort of left each of those experiences going, well, this is interesting and this is fascinating, but I don't know if this is really what I want to do with this degree. And then started working with students, and I've always really enjoyed education. And so the opportunity to work with students in that sort of developmental age range turned out to be really rewarding. What I found was what sort of the impetus for shifting away from the counseling and doing true therapy kind of work was I found myself drawn more and more towards helping students tackle the challenges that were preventing them from being successful in the classroom. And some of that is, maybe stress, maybe just not really understanding the learning process, and how to apply that to your studying so that when you are trying to ace an exam, move from B's to A's, C's to B's, failing to passing, you're doing it in a way that is, I'll say, evidence-based, rather than I'm doing this because I'm studying this way because this is why I've always studied.
Right. What percentage of the students that you work with? So you work with professional students specifically, and what percentage of those students are taking focusing medications? We'll just leave it broad and open-ended like that.
Oh, that's a good question. To be honest, I don't know. Because it's not something...
Because you're right now not serving in their capacity as well, maybe you are. Are you serving in capacity as their therapist as
No.
opposed to their coach?
More coach,
Right.
Really coach, not therapist. It's and that is something I remind them of. I'm here to kind of support their academic success. I'm not doing therapy. I'm not doing counseling in my office. That's not the relationship that we have. I think the benefit of me is I can recognize things maybe a little bit quicker and refer them to either mental health services on campus or somewhere else in the community, to help facilitate those connections a little bit easier. So I do have to remind them, because sometimes you get a listening ear and people just want to share more than they would normally share.
Like if you're on a 13-mile run and you just sort of forget what you're talking about.
Exactly right. Yeah. Exactly right. The irony is, when people find out that you have any sort of background in psychology, one of two things is going to happen. They're either going to tell you nothing, right, and just sort of clam up, or they tell you way too much.
Which one do I do?
Well, Chris, you're always talking. I don't think that has anything to do with me having a background in psychology or not.
That's true. Yeah, it's something I think is something magical about running. Honestly,
oh yeah.
What do you think that is when you think about, maybe there's a psychological aspect of that, but is there something? I always think that there's something about endorphins, something about bonding together in something hard that breaks barriers down and builds trust. Am I just full of garbage, or is there something to that?
Oh no, I think that makes some sense to me as well. I think the shared experience of really anything is a powerful thing. I think the beauty of running, it's hard. Depending on where you are, 1 mile can be ridiculously difficult. As we were training and trying to get me up to a marathon, I remember getting up to 20, and you're like, you got another 6 and a 6.2 in you? I go, no, I do not. Well, you're still breathing just fine, right?
But I believe in that marathon, you beat me in that marathon, didn't you?
I mean, I wasn't. It depends. Can you edit this podcast? Because
I can edit it. I'm not going to.
I mean, I may have crossed before you physically, right? Mentally, though, you're right there with me.
Thanks.
Yeah,
thanks
you
for
bet.
that.
You bet.
Yeah, no, it was that was a grueling one for me. So I think, there's a lot in running that I think about in terms of like mental barriers, right? Doing something hard where you like physically, and we've talked about this before too. So go ahead, I'll let you.
Well, so there's I guess 2 points. One was in terms of the bond that gets built while you're running. The other thing I appreciate about it is simply the time, where if you're out running and, we might be out for hour and a half sometimes too. And you go, we can't just have surface conversations and talk about the weather or what's going on over the weekend in local sports, right? At some point, conversation has to turn to more meaningful things. And so you move to a different level and builds different connection. To your point about it being like that marathon being a grueling marathon, I've been floored just how much of running is mental. My body will go a lot farther than my brain thinks it will. Like as we were talking earlier, I was trying to get some miles in before I was coming over here to do this podcast. And it was hot and I wasn't hydrated and hadn't had enough to eat. So physically, not the best idea I'd ever had. But I don't know if I was even 2 miles. Maybe I was at 2 miles, maybe and change. And you have the thought, I'm not going to be able to do this. I can't do this. And couldn't get it out of my head. I turned around and at some point I started walking. And every time I walk, I always hear your voice.
Don't walk.
When we were training, you go, just don't walk. I don't care if you're running at a walking pace. Don't walk.
It's true, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's mental.
Yeah, it is. I think there's. I'm always amazed when I talk to people what they think they can't do. I mean, I'll talk to patients and I'll be like, oh, you should come do this or come do that, or I'll just talk to other people. You should come do. I can't get up at 5:15. I can't get up at 5:30. Man, I couldn't keep up with you. It's like, that's not I'll keep up with you. Like, that's not, we'll go there. And so I guess my point is I just expand that to other parts of life. And do you see a lot of that with students, or do you see any of that in your,
oh yeah,
when you're a counselor or when you're a coach?
So what's interesting is I was reading through some of the books on my shelf, and one of the things they were talking about is the impact of mindset, right? So a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. fixed mindset being from like, let's say from an academic standpoint, I'm this smart, so I can only do this well, right? I only have this amount of intelligence. It's not anything that is fluid or can be developed or grow. As opposed to a growth mindset, I'm this smart, but I can get smarter, right? Or we're talking running. I'm trying to do speed work to get faster, as opposed to looking at my times each week and going, this is just how fast I am, right? So that's fixed. Growth is going to say, well, if I put some work in it and dedicate to it, I can get faster, as hard as that's going to be. I see it in students where they'll sort of have in their mind, I'm not a good test taker. And there is certainly some skill and strategy to recognizing and understanding how tests are made and how what it is that you're being asked and how you're being asked, and be able to recognize those things. But at the same time, I think part of the obstacle there is really that fixed mindset where you've told yourself, I can't do this. And
how prevalent is it, do you think? And why do you think people get into that mindset? How are we trained that way?
Boy, that's a good question. I suspect some of it, nature versus nurture, I'm going to guess is both. Like most things, it's always right. The great debate: how much of us and who we are is our genetics and how we're hardwired, and how much of it is the environment in which we're raised. The answer is the estimates range from what 39% to 61%. So you go, right. Okay, so we're talking 50-50, yeah. Right?
It's like a weatherman.
Yeah,
maybe.
That's it, right. I'm close enough in the ballpark. Yeah. It may rain, it may not. So I think some of that might be how we're wired, in that, you may just have a personality, a mindset that maybe is just more rigid in that way of thinking, or closed off to newer ideas or other possibilities. But at the same time, I think you can have someone that maybe is more open, but if you grow up in an environment that kind of always tells you that here's what you're good at, here's what you're not good at, we take that stuff in and we can internalize those things, right? It's you pay attention to what gets rewarded, what gets punished. Am I focused on, hooray, you got a B, looks like you're a B student? Or are we talking about, hey, you got a B, but look at all that effort, man, you worked hard. Let's keep focusing on working hard, and see where that can take you. That could certainly give you a different mindset.
Have we gone too far down the path societally where we kind of limit people's own expectations of themselves by kind of informing them of what they can and can't do?
Gosh, from a societal standpoint, I don't know. That's hard.
I'm asking you to paint a broad brush, I know.
Yeah,
well, paint away.
Well, I think that's where I'm struggling. Because
in your experience,
yeah,
with the patients you've worked with in the past and the people you've worked with now, is there any sense of changes in society that tell them that they're limited in some way or shape or form?
I don't know that I would identify any changes in society. I think where I sort of struggle is with painting with that broad of a brush. Because I'm always, whether I was working with students as a client or working with students as a coach, I'm always sort of focused on that student, and what their way of orienting themselves to the world, their way of orienting themselves to their studies, and sort of the environmental influences. So what is their immediate environment, their immediate culture, right? So depending on the age of the student, because they can range some. Maybe you're still living at home, and so you wonder what kind of messages come from or responses you get from parents, friends, significant others, like whoever it is that's in their circle. But to think at a larger societal level,
what I'm asking,
that'd be difficult.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is, you made the comment of nurturing versus nature.
Mm-hmm.
And you made the comment that, certainly a B student who worked his butt off to get a B
Mm-hmm.
is different than a B student who completely slacked off and just got a B. So are we, I guess, with the things like, you always hear about everybody gets a trophy, right? So then the kids that are rewarded for doing nothing and the kids that are rewarded the same, right, as the kids that were rewarded for doing nothing, that worked really hard, but like achieved more than what they could have like actually done if they would have just like played at their level. They just played up versus kids that just played down. I'm using sports as an analogy, but I guess my point is does that actually factor into people's behaviors, or is that just sort of a talking point that people discuss? Do you think it's a real effect of, you have a St. Wenceslas soccer tournament and everybody gets a medal at the end, which is nice. I like it. It feels good. But
what does that do to my willingness to really continue to push and work hard if I'm going to get a reward anyway?
Right. Or is there a way to translate that at some point where that reward has to be really rewarded as opposed to like just being because?
That's an interesting question, because there's rewards and punishments, right? So things that are rewarded, we're going to do more. Things that are punished, we're going to do less. So I can appreciate why we're going to reward everyone's participation, right? People are doing what they can do. But does that deflate? I guess it wouldn't necessarily surprise me if maybe it, I don't want to say devalues the impact of that reward, in that everyone's getting it regardless of the effort or the outcome. So maybe the reward is varied in some way. From an academic standpoint, we're talking about A's versus B's versus C's, right? And a question of what is it that you want to get? What are you willing to work for? The difficult, I think that part of the challenge is, as you sort of alluded to, there are certainly some people that they can cram the night before and still ace things.
Yeah.
And other people have been studying for a week and are just squeaking by. That's a challenge.
When you think about the psychology of that, do you think that most people, by the time they get to professional school, is aware of the type of person they are in that specific realm? Like, are they aware that they're the guy that can study the night before versus the guy that knows they just have to, and then they're aware of that and they kind of lean into it?
I would say they're aware of that history. Oh, very, very much so. What's interesting about sort of doing the work that I do, at some point, everybody. Okay, so I will paint with a bit of a broad brush. At some point, everybody kind of realizes, oh, now I've got to work harder, right? What I'm doing hasn't worked. I think we have those moments at various points, right? I remember failing a math test in the 6th grade, right? And that still has stuck out to me. Why? I didn't pay attention to the signs. I'm not making that mistake again, right? So lesson learned.
Yep. You failed.
Yes.
You had a negative consequence. You decided you're not going to do that again.
Yes. And so I check my work now, right? The second was my freshman year in high school. And that biology class was, I mean, it kicked me in the rear. Really, really shook me. But I learned, okay, I have to, I'll put in air quotes, double my efforts, right? I have to work harder. I have to be smarter about what it is that I'm doing. What the strategies I've been using don't work anymore. And then was able to make that adjustment and do fine. So I think everybody has those experiences, and over time you sort of develop this identity of this is how I am as a student. I can get by with minimum work, or I got to work my tail off just to get through this stuff or get a C. And yes, people are aware that, yes, I think they kind of internalize that identity in the same way we have an identity for anything else, right? You'll have an identity as a practitioner. You have an identity as podcast producer, right? Identity as a runner. And people will have an identity as a student. And I would imagine that's probably still true for you, knowing that practitioners, you still got to do continuing education and things like that, right?
Yeah.
And so you have a mindset of, okay, well, this is what I need to do to get through this material. The challenge for a person like me is when they hit one of those bumps or one of those ceilings that they got to work through at the professional level. You've got 20 plus years of educational history that says, this is what I do to be successful. And sometimes it's really good stuff, and sometimes it's just, this is what I've always done. And so I'm trying to get them on board to trying something new based on research around, this is how we learn, this is how our memories work, this is how we build those connections in our brain to be able to store stuff and pull stuff back out. The challenge is at the higher level, it feels like there's more riding on it, right? So why am I going to try this new thing and potentially risk another exam grade? And because we can make things bigger than they are, risk this exam grade and my professional future, right? For something you're telling me to do that I've never tried, when I'm just going to do what I've always done, but do it more.
Right.
So it's kind of like, well, you're on this hamster wheel. You're running faster, good job, but you're still not going anywhere.
Do you think that, so I have the same kind of story, right? I can remember this time for me. I was a totally mediocre student in high school and even undergrad. You know, I think I was probably always underperforming. And then in optometry school, I tried to change my behavior. So I was a crammer. And I tried to change my behavior. And so I was like really prepared. I remember my first anatomy and physiology test. And it probably had something to do with the fact that I think she probably made it really hard. And they were just trying to see how you react. I think there's probably something to it. But so I like kept up on everything. I studied every night, tried to, be really organized. And then I bombed. I probably got like a D, the first one. And I was like, what? And I had this, like, I'm sure, that was probably the point, right? You have this reeling of like, oh, can I do this? Am I in a place where I shouldn't be? And so I did a couple of things. First, I reverted back to like what was good, but also, my perspective was I got to learn this stuff. I can't just like regurgitate it for a test. So there's got to be a way that I can learn it throughout. So what I got really good at was just focusing in the lectures, like focusing in person, taking active notes, and then like thinking about the things that somebody was talking about.
And that's it.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's what I'm talking with students about. The cramming is a blessing and a curse, because cramming's great for short-term gains, right? Cramming's better than nothing. The problem is you're holding it briefly. And then once you take that exam, you walk out of there, that stuff is gone, right? Take another exam 2 days later, it won't go well. But it gives you that sort of immediate return. It's just not a lasting thing. The shift is becoming more actively, and because people talk about it as active. I talk about it as being intentional. So you would then go to lectures with the plan in mind, with the purpose of, I'm walking out of here with some semblance of an understanding of what we're talking about, a solid, complete set of notes that I can work from after this. I'm going to think on a deeper level. So you're processing more in a more elaborate kind of way, right? You'll hear people often say, well, think about a patient or a family member that has this condition, right? And it just gives you a hook, because anything that we're learning, in essence, we're tying into something we already know. I'll talk to students about things like, the first time you see a zebra, what do people call it? It's a striped horse, right? Because you already have this idea of what a horse is. And so this new information is getting tied into something that's already there. So as you decided to think more deeply about the material and what it's saying, what its implications are, why it's going to be relevant for you, all of that is trying to build connections, which then, in essence, provides a logic to where you're storing that information. We're sitting by your computer here. It's like, how do you organize your laptop? Cramming is just, I'm going to throw it all on the desktop. Super easy to access, but I can't exactly find everything because there's no rhyme or reason to it. When you're thinking about, from a student perspective, well, this paper is for my history class in the spring of 2020 in this section, right? So you have all these folders and subfolders. It's more onerous to organize it that way on the front end. But 2 semesters later, when someone says, what'd you write that paper about? You know right where it is. And so you can recall it easier. That's the same process, I would argue, you were engaging in when you came back and said, no, I still have to trust this process. I still got to actively engage and not just cram and dump it. What you're doing is creating a more elaborate web to allow yourself to pull that information back out.
How many people actually use those tools consciously? When they develop them, are they developing them consciously? Or like me, it wasn't conscious, right? It was just sort of, I got to figure this out because this is what I want to do and I need to be good at it.
Yeah.
And then figuring out how to like pass a test beyond that is another thing. But so I got to be good at it. How many people do you think actually make a conscious effort of that? And if not, I'll leave it there. How many people do you think do that?
It depends if they're working with me, Chris. I think there are some people that become aware of the benefit, right, of doing that because you see my grades improved, my studying improves, I walk away with a better understanding, I can explain it to other people, so clearly it's sticking. And so those positive experiences reinforce that effort. So we do kind of become aware of that process. At the same time, I think there's also a fair number of people that aren't aware and so don't do it, or meaning they just sort of keep doing what they've always done without stepping back to evaluate, is this working or not? And if it's not, how come? And then trying to make appropriate adjustments. Or they're doing it sort of like you just don't know the sort of the science behind it, the research behind it in the way that I would talk about it with you in my office.
How do you translate that then? I guess the second follow-up question I would have to that would be, how many people get done with professional school and keep accessing that same sort of technique in their lifelong learning process?
Boy, that's a great question. I don't hear from our alumni, so I wouldn't be able to wager a guess on that. the hope would be, and I talk to students about this, because for the students that are in the programs that I work with, it's like, I don't have a background in those programs, right? So if you're asking for content specific information, I am no help. Like, you do not want my advice. But everything I'm talking about can apply to any of the subjects you're working in. Because what I'm talking about is really the learning process. So if they, and I'll tell them this, everything we're talking about for this one subject that you might be struggling in, I'll say, there's nothing I'm talking about here that you cannot apply to your other courses. I suspect there's some that continue to use it, and I would wager there's still a fair number of people that use it for the one subject that they're needing to improve in, and don't make that leap to other courses. At times, I will very intentionally tell them, do this, what we're talking about for this class, do that over here with this other class as well, and let's see what happens. Sometimes they're kind of on board, sometimes they're not. Oftentimes, I'll just sort of present it as, well, let's just run an experiment. Let's try doing it this way. Let's see what happens. So that they can have the experience, and then rather than me trying to convince them, they have their own lived experience that will motivate them to keep doing it.
Do you think that COVID has changed a lot of the things that you're dealing with or you're managing? You feel like more people are coming in with more? I know that that's not specifically what you're doing for them, but do you feel like, the lack of human interaction, or the reduction in human interaction, the reduction of actual feedback like you and I are able to get from one another, instead of I'm sorry. Go ahead. Say what you're going to say.
No, keep going.
Yeah, exactly. We're doing the Zoom thing, right?
Yeah, right.
So without being able to kind of see when you're done, and does that have any bearing on the types of things that you're seeing, or the anxiety that you're seeing people, students working with?
I would maybe indirectly. I mean, we're social beings, right? So to be able and I'm a capital I introvert, right? Even
it's weird because I don't think of you like that.
Well, I'm an introvert that understands the benefit of doing things extrovertedly in our society.
What does that mean? What do you mean by extrovertedly? Like, you understand you have to do it, or that is good for you to do? I
understand that it's good for me to do.
Do you like it?
Aspects of it, yes. If left to my own devices, I could easily go home, like talk. I'll exaggerate and say talk to no one, just sort of hang out, or just sort of hang out with my family, and that's it. But at the same time, and I'm going to guess you maybe don't see me that way because, we're running, or you see me coaching or doing stuff.
No, I think you see you exactly that way. You just listen to me while we go for 13 miles or 20 miles.
Yes.
And then we're done, and I'm like, that was a fast run. And you're like, you didn't shut up. That's why.
That's right. It passed the time. It got us through. That's all that matters. But I recognize the benefits of social connection, having community, right? Yeah.
But we've broken that down. I mean, it's broken. Like, it's broken down. I am actually pleasantly surprised at how it has quickly has responded. I think in general, people who I was surprised. I was talking to Matt Lunning about this, and he and I sort of had this gentleman's bet, ongoing for months. Of like, I was like, look, when masking is let up, you're still going to have a huge portion of people that are going to be masked. And it's still interesting to me, the ones that are still masking, and most of them are fully vaccinated. My assumption is, and even when I talk to them, they're fully vaccinated, but they're They're still doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not I was actually expecting to be a lot bigger portion. And I don't want this conversation to be a COVID conversation or a masking conversation. But like in a lot of ways, I don't think for me, because I've been able to engage with people like in a human way throughout this whole thing. But I think a lot of people have not. And it's got to weigh on you. It would weigh on me. And I would say I'm not necessarily an extrovert naturally, but I'm like you. I enjoy it. And I sort of shy away from it. But when I do engage, I walk away being like, oh, it was great. You know?
Right. So what I would say is, I don't know that it, I wouldn't say it wrecked it. I would say, like anything else, it changed things. You were asking about the anxieties and stressors of being a student, or, the students I would be working with. And I would contend that it changed that experience, like it did for anybody in school. Your kids, my kids, grade school, middle school, high school, doesn't matter. Employees. So I'll use myself as an example, because I think it can extrapolate. Working remotely, talking with people via Zoom, so that's fine. But I remember very distinctly at some point turning to my wife and saying, look, because she was still able to go to her work during all of this. I said, look, you are going to come home to the same mess that exists in our house when you left as when you leave. Because I'm sitting around the house on meetings and things, and what do I see? Well, look at this mess in this room. Let me put these dishes away. Oh, I'll go change a load of laundry. And so I'll talk with students about this too, where you think there are these 5-minute tasks. This will be really quick. But what they miss is thinking about that task takes you away from the task at hand. What should take 5 minutes, you normally is going to take you 10. And then you got to jump back into the task that you were doing. So what should be 5 minutes ends up being 20, right? So it changes that experience. And then I would also argue that it changes the experience because if you're someone that normally was working from home, well, now you maybe have kids home or a spouse home. And so it just changed that whole experience. I know some people that have kind of loved it and are not reticent to go back, but really have come to appreciate the sort of benefits of being able to work from home and do things remotely. And it's not a fear of coming back because, well, who's, is someone vaccinated or not, or, how close we're going to be around to people. It's just, I like doing things this way now. Right. And then I know other people that have been dying to get back because they do need that social interaction, and just it's what charges their batteries. Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely see the efficiencies for me when I'm, especially like summer now. If I've got 2 or 3 hours of work I want to do on a Thursday or Friday, where when the kids were in school, I could plan for things to be, I could dedicate my time, but I'm not as efficient as if I'm in the office, even if I'm not seeing patients. The problem is if I'm in the office, the inclination is if I'm there, I can deal with office things, like things that are I don't need to deal with today, where I can focus. And if I'm at home, I can focus on how am I going to run my practice and some of the practice business, and just like thinking about my practice without being interrupted by the practice.
Yes.
But I have to manage that with, Dad, can I have a pancake? It's like, you just ate breakfast. I just made you breakfast. Right. And so like, that's worse in the summer. But it is interesting because you say that there's these different dynamics that you don't even think about. Because I know if I sit down, it does take sort of this time to kind of gather my thoughts and get involved and like focus your brain, and then you sort of start moving in a direction and then boom,
Right.
snaps you right out of it.
Yes. Yes. And then you got to go through that whole process of trying to get back
Do
into
these play a lot of role in that, just
phones?
in general?
Yes. Yeah. Good.
Did you bring yours in?
Yeah, it's sitting in my pocket.
You haven't checked it yet.
No.
That's good.
Well, I have a small streak in me that says, well, this is what's cool and exciting in our society, so I'm not going to do it. Right. So I can also not check it just to be obstinate.
Yeah, if the listeners saw you, they'd know you're definitely not a rebel.
Well, that is very true. That is very true. But yeah, so things like phones are a constant distraction.
Yeah.
And
even when it doesn't alert me, sometimes I'm just like, I'll be there and I'll be working, and then it's like 2, 3, 4 steps go, like, okay, I'll just check on this, check on that, check on this. Now I'm at my phone.
yes,
It's like,
yes.
and
And then you're scrolling through and I got this app open and this app, and I'm scrolling through these going, wait, what am I doing here? Yes.
we didn't have to deal with that when we were in school.
No.
Or we were in our training.
I have, it's funny to watch students' faces when I say, when you're studying, you can just turn it off. Like, oh, I put it on silent. I said, no, I know. You could turn it off. Like, if you miss that text, your world is generally still going to keep moving, right? But it's so normative now that to suggest to turn it off or not have it around
crazy.
You it gets wonderful looks. But the students that do it will come back, I got so much done. Yeah. Because even when it's not on your mind, it's on your mind.
Right.
Like, well, did I miss a text? Maybe it buzzed. I didn't hear it.
Or the phantom watch, like, ding,
Yes.
where I always have, my watch doesn't make any noise, but it vibrates.
Yeah.
Right. So I've had that multiple times where I'm like, and I'm checking it. I'm looking down and checking my watch, and it's like nothing. There wasn't anything, but it felt like there was something.
Yes.
So it's even just the little taps on your wrist now that are just normal taps by moving your body around are poking that up. So weird.
And things like your phone. So I teach an introduction to psychology class, and when I'm talking about reinforcement schedules, they talk about.
Do you just teach that for undergrads?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's fixed interval, fixed ratio. So am I getting my reward after a certain passage of time? So I get paycheck every 2 weeks, right? Versus a fixed fixed ratio where, I'm getting paid for I get a bonus every 10 cars I sell, something like, So it doesn't matter. It's not time based. It's
achievement based.
Yeah. Right. Or you can have either one of those, but on a variable schedule. So after a certain amount of time, it's not always the same, or a variable ratio. Variable ratio are things like slot machines, or when you go fishing, right? Is it 1 cast? Is it 2 casts? Is it 3 casts? I don't exactly know, but every once in a while you get a fish. And what does that make you want to do? Keep fishing, right? It makes
me not want to fish.
to me, it's my golf game, right?
Yeah,
I need a good shot. I say about every 3 holes or so. You just never know when it's going to come, but it's the shot that keeps you playing. Your phone, they ding, not at a regular interval. It's not every certain amount of time where you could anticipate it and know I can ignore this for a while, right? It's so inconsistent. It's this variable ratio kind of schedule that it makes you keep checking. Do they get to reply that text? You and I are, old enough where it's like, I could say email, right? People younger don't look at email, right? Everything is texting on your phone. But for me, it's like, well, let me check my email. Like, well, maybe
somebody else wants me to do some work for them. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So yes, terribly distracting.
What should we do about it?
Well, you may be asking the wrong guy, because I'm also someone that at times I think, I can read a map and I can check my email at work and at home.
I've thought about that before. I thought about
do I get rid of a smartphone?
I mean, when I moved down to Oklahoma, we were, we printed, we still, in fairness, we were far enough away where I know how to use a map, right? And navigate through it myself. But I would still go to MapQuest or Google had sheets, right? But I type it out, print it off.
Yes.
And I even remember when I first started speaking, when I was just out of school, I didn't have an iPhone. And I would know where am I going to stay and where am I going to lecture. And I would print off directions to get from the airport to the hotel, from the hotel to the school.
Yes.
And then back. I would do reverse directions, right? So like I didn't have to like think about navigating a map. So far gone.
So I remember going to a lake with my wife, and we had passed through one town, and then the next town was going to be the exit. And I go, "Oh, that's 8 miles." And I had a map open just because I just kind of curious and just reading it. She goes, "How do you know that? You've never been there." And I go, "Well, here's the dot for the town we just went through. Here's the dot for the town we got to exit."
How large a mile
and it
is?
says, "No, there was an 8."
Oh, there
You go,
was.
"That's 8 miles. Done." And I look back at that experience and go, that's great problem solving. If I don't got a phone, I can still find where I need to go. My kids are going to have no idea how to do that. And there's part of me that, sort of laments, oh man, what a lost art, lost skill. And I think, is it?
Yeah. Did you really need to spend your brain power to worry about that?
Now, I would argue, I think that's great, right? But at the same time, to me, it's like spelling. I think spelling is important.
I don't.
Well, at the same time, there's a squiggly blue line under anything or red line under anything I misspell on my computer, and it will fix it for me. I mean, at this point, I start writing emails and I can hit tab because that's what I want to say. Yeah. So just fill that in for me.
Is it what you want to say, or it's good enough?
Sometimes, I'll say both. Sometimes
it is both.
Yep, that's what I want to say, and sometimes I go, oh, that's close enough. That's fine. But
if you have any questions or concerns, concerns is good.
I did want to say that. Yeah, that sounds good. Yes. Yeah.
But psychologically, and just like for our emotional well-being, good or bad? Should we shut the things off? Should we delete apps? Social media, good or bad?
Oh, well, that's wonderfully loaded. It's like anything.
Let me start with the first one. Should we shut them off at nighttime when we get home?
So my answer is going to be the same in terms of shutting it off at nighttime when you get home, or what do you do with social media?
Okay.
It depends.
On what?
The person, right? Can you set those boundaries for yourself? Can you walk away from your phone? It's like any, I say it's like any behavior. It's like anything in moderation, right? Too much of something, not good. Too little of something, well, that's can be harder to say isn't good, but somewhere in the middle. So
are there tricks that, like, if you're having a student that is having a challenge that you've identified that's likely a challenge with their focus? What kind of things do you help them with to try to say, like, okay, well, let's just set these boundaries? Are there things that work well? Like maybe we don't turn it off, but we put it in a space that we never.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, I might again. Let's run an experiment. Let's try putting it away, or at least turn it on silent, right? Or let's put it away. Or if they're willing, like, let's turn it off and let's just see what happens, right? See how you do, because depending on who you're working with, to say shut it off, like power it down, that itself can be really stressful and really distracting. So it will kind of depend on that, on who it is that you're working with, but it's the same as like, well, what's your favorite snack, right? Well, I can't have too many of these cookies or this kind of chip or whatever. You go, well, okay, then either you have to limit yourself when you go to eat that, or depending on your level of self-control, You don't buy it, right? I'm a sucker for ice cream.
Me too. What's your favorite?
Oh, just chocolate.
Just
Yeah.
chocolate ice cream?
If you put
What brand? What brand of
chocolate-
chocolate ice cream?
Oh, I don't know that I care.
What?
Here's the deal.
What do you buy most of?
We don't have ice cream in the
Okay.
house for this reason. You put chocolate and mint together.
What kind of mint? Like mint ice cream?
Yeah.
Not mint chocolate chip.
Sure, mint chocolate chip, but here's the deal. Then crush up Oreos, throw that in there, mix that together, delish. Awesome. Well, see, now I'm wonderfully sidetracked. I don't remember exactly where we were going with this.
You were limiting ice cream in your diet.
Oh yeah. So I kind of recognize like this is it's clockwork. 9 o'clock.
Oh,
yeah,
me
like,
too.
At some point, like
Yeah,
yep,
I'm
I'm
actually right
ready
now.
for
I'm
it.
ready for ice cream.
Yes.
A big bowl of ice cream.
Yes, and it's like we're doing all this running, and at some point, I'm like, well, this is like zero-sum game. Like I'm not getting any benefit. Oh, that's because I run in the morning and then I eat a big cup of ice cream at night. So you go, we're gonna get rid of this. Because I know myself. Now there's other stuff where you go, like, I'm a Cheez-It fan, right?
Cheez-Its?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. Not good for you at all.
Who says?
Well, the nutrition label for what?
The nutrition label doesn't say this isn't good for you, especially if you don't understand the nutrition label.
Well, let's say that it would be like ice cream, but
But Bread Group, remember when we were growing up, Bread Group was on the bottom.
yes.
Cheez-It fall into the Bread Group. And then right above that, what was the next group?
Proteins?
I think probably milk.
Was it?
I don't know. I'm
Dairy
guessing.
had its
Yeah.
own category.
Probably you had bread and then dairy, right? The two most egregious
Yes.
lobbies,
Yes.
right? Food lobbies.
Yes.
And cheeses would fall into the two bottom food groups.
That's right. I was killing two birds with one stone.
That's
I was
right.
being efficient, really, more than anything else.
Yeah.
But that's one of those things I can sort of set a limit for myself. So that's fine. Things like cell phones and social media to me are the same.
The same as Cheez-Its?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So you can set a limit easily.
I can, because I didn't grow up with them.
Yeah. I think the same thing for me. I think I can set a limit on cell phone usage in general, but I do find myself like even like I don't need it. And actually I learned this lesson. So I was I was getting up to run early. This was in January, and they had these new set of rules that came out, a year ago for how we use evaluation and management codes.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody paid attention to them for a year because they were going to go live January 1st, 2021. Nobody paid attention. And then all of a sudden everybody's asking all these questions, and I had kind of updated everything and talked about everything. And there was a lot of ambiguity still within the guidance that we were being given. So we had to interpret.
Mm-hmm.
And so we interpreted one way or the other. And I tried to be a conservative interpreter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm gonna err on the side of being as conservative as possible, meaning that like if we're going to make a decision, a judgment, it's going to lead us down the path of a lower code.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, though, I made the error of assuming that it was going to be similar to older systems, right? So I said, okay, here's the older system. Here's what they told us to do in the older system.
Mm-hmm.
You're being ambiguous here. If you're ambiguous, it's probably going to mean we can revert toward the older system, right? So I tell you all this to say, I check my phone usually before I go to bed.
Mm-hmm.
No need to. I don't need to do that.
Right.
I'm getting up to run first thing in the morning. I check my phone, right? It's 4:00 in the morning. I get up, I check my phone.
Who's contacting you
And
at
I
4 a.m.?
Yeah, and I see. Well, no, it was just an email. It's just an errant email that I got from somebody that attended something that I did a month or two before.
Sure.
That read something else that was like updated that night before,
Gotcha.
or there was new guidance. I think it was actually what happened was there was new guidance that came out that night before, and I see it, and I was like, oh. And And you think of like, how many people did I talk to about this, and how do I correct it? Like it didn't. The thing is it didn't need to be corrected at 4:00 in the morning, right?
Right.
I didn't need to know that information at 4:00 in the morning. So like a workout that I was planning on going running with people, like kind of letting my brain go. All I could do was think about how can I rectify all the terror that I've done to the world.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so like
it's an injustice.
Yeah. No, and that's
right.
but that's
the
like
sense.
And so I think about that, and I had enough time to afterwards think, okay, well, I'm not going to check it right before bed, and I'm not going to check it first thing. That went out that goes out the window quick, right?
Yeah.
But the point is that you and I are old enough to separate ourselves from that. People you're working with now are kids.
Right.
It is built into the cake.
Correct.
How much of a problem is that?
That's a great generational question. I don't know that I would necessarily describe it as a problem, because it's the reality. I was thinking about this a couple days ago.
Could they not thrive in their world without that? Would they be weirdos?
I think it would be a challenge, if I'm being honest. And again, this is just me.
Yeah.
Because it is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It is the norm. I at times will go for a walk, go for a run, go run some errands. I forget, there was a couple days in the last month, like 2 days, where I didn't have my phone at work. Left it at home when I left for the day. So I sent an email to my wife saying, hey, if you need to get a hold of me, call my office, because I don't have a phone. And to me, there's this liberating feeling with it. Like,
you can't talk to me while I'm on my way to the office.
Like,
you're untethered.
Yes.
Not to your wife, but just to the thing.
Just to the thing, right? To being always available. And not that I want to be unavailable, right? But you can survive without it, right? But I have half of my life's experience that says, yeah, you don't need this, and that's okay. Our kids, it's different, and I think it's a challenge, because it is everywhere. My oldest is entering high school, just got a cell phone.
We always do that too. We get, that's kind of our thing, is once ours is 1 year before that, but they'll get a cell phone once they hit 8th grade, and they're going to need to,
And the challenge is, it's like everybody else has it. So,
and they don't have it in 9th grade or 8th grade. Most of my kids' friends have it when they're
way
5th,
sooner, right?
4th,
right?
Yeah.
And I'm not here saying what one is right or one is wrong,
I
but it's just,
we don't judge people in our society anymore.
No, not at all.
Why not?
Oh, you weren't being facetious?
No, I'm serious. We don't judge people. We don't judge actions anymore as good or bad. Sorry, let's go to we'll come up with that in a second.
Yes, we
rarely. Well, we've judged them. We've twisted some of the judgments around.
Well, that's going to be a whole nother podcast, Chris.
I didn't tell you how long this was going to run.
Oh, that's true. That is very true. It's. I would say it was to not have a cell phone or any type of social media before now was difficult for him. Did he survive? Yes. Do I think he learns some good lessons through that kind of experience? Yes. But at the same time,
Can he look at me in the eye? I can't remember. Can your kids look at me in the eye if I talk to them? They shake my hand and
They would.
yeah, I think they would too. I think I've met them, and I think they, if I recall, sometimes I have to tell my kids still. I'll have to remind them.
Yes. I mean, it'd be wonderfully awkward just because of the ages that they are.
Yeah.
But yes. But that's something we're very intentional about.
It's hard to know. It's just hard to know what I did when I was their age too, right? Like my oldest daughter, who's going to be a sophomore, she's right on there, right? She gets it.
So this is why I said this was a tough generational question, because what I was thinking about a couple of days ago was look at our parents' generation, and they could easily look at our generation and say, "Well, we didn't have all that, and we turned out fine, and so
yeah,
you don't need any of
that
that stuff, right?"
Yeah.
And I can look at younger generation and go, well, I didn't need all that. You don't need all that. But at the same time, this is their lived reality, right? So
what does that mean? Lived reality. What do you mean by that?
It's the reality that they are living in.
Isn't just reality? Like, why do we have to label it something that's lived? Isn't just reality?
Boy, you like the big questions, Chris.
I'm trying.
Why do I need that qualifier?
There's terms that I hear that innately make me feel weird. Like, why did we throw lived in experience? Isn't experience, in fact, by the nature of the definition, one that you experience? Like why do we, I mean, I'm not trying to be philosophical. I'm not trying to break down words. It's just interesting to me why I hear these terms sometimes, and I'm kind of like, what is it different than just reality? Or does it mean something else that we're all talking about? Like, we think we know what people are talking about, but we don't really know.
So let me put it this way. When I'm saying it's his lived reality, it's not my lived reality at his age.
So
right?
It's not.
So it wasn't.
So wait.
Yeah.
You could say it's his reality.
Yes.
But it wasn't your reality.
It was not my
his
reality. Right.
So what's the function verbally of lived?
For me, it is.
Is it just sort of the way we talk now? It's just the way we talk now?
Maybe.
Why?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not expecting you to have the answer, because I don't know.
Right.
I don't know, but it seems like we've sort of, maybe, I don't know, language changes. Like, I remember when I was growing up, something was really cool was mad fat, right? Now it's bussin'. Right, my kids say,
"Oh,
it's
cooler
bussin'."
than me.
Oh, you don't know that yet?
All I know is
my kids can't
cap.
wait. They're gonna listen.
Heard no cap.
Yeah, they're gonna listen to this, and they can't wait when they hear me say bussin'. But my point is that like,
bussin'. I'm gonna use that when I get home.
You should use it with your students.
Yeah.
But then there's other things, like, I think this is different. Like, when we talk about a lived experience, a lived reality, like, well, it's redundant. Why has that change occurred? It almost, to me, signals like, well, is it actually saying that there are different realities? Like, my reality is different than your reality.
Well,
so I have to qualify it by saying my lived.
Yes.
reality.
And I think that maybe is the distinction, right? So it's the idea, the question of, what's the phrase? Perception is reality, right? And are you on board with that idea or not? Because we can be at the same ball game, soccer game, whatever, right? Kids play. Experience it very differently. Whose reality is right, whose reality is wrong. See, you said you didn't want to get philosophical, and yet here we are.
I do. That's exactly what I do. Sometimes it takes some time, but it's interesting to me because, so my experience, I would grant you that my experience might be different than yours. Mm-hmm. Same soccer game, but the reality of the soccer game has to be the same, right? So like we'll let's put it this way. Let's say we both go to the same soccer game.
Mhm.
You sit on the home team's side. I sit on the
Yeah.
opposing team's
You
side.
betcha. My kids versus your kids.
Exactly.
My kids win, obviously.
You're coaching, right? You're reffing, right?
Right. Our goals count as 2.
Yeah. So if that's the case, our experiences are different. But
Correct.
the reality of the game, can that be different? Because then what I'm saying is, and I'm just trying to, I don't know the answer. I'm not trying to tease out some sort of like, it's just, when I hear you talk about it, then it's just leading me to think about it. But, when we say lived reality, or is it just another way to say our experiences, or is there something deeper in our psyche to say, to inform somebody to say, you can't tell me what's right or wrong. This is how I've experienced it. So it is right.
So maybe I might put a qualifier on there or change the word right. It might be a way of acknowledging this is my reality from my lived experience and perceptions of what happened.
What do you mean?
Sorry, lived experience. I know it came out of my mouth, and I was like, I knew he's gonna jump on this word. So it's a way of acknowledging this was my experience or my perceptions of these events, and so that is what is coloring my reality.
Your perception of what occurred,
which allows for it to be different than yours.
Right. Yeah. So, but I think fundamentally words mean something. So I'm just wondering why our words have changed, where reality has to be qualified. I don't know. I mean, this is the first time I've really explored it in depth, but there's just sort of this innate, I've never talked to anybody about it, but when I hear that, I just am like, it doesn't sound right. It's not, so I guess, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure we're boring people, but it's interesting to me. So I'm going to continue with it, is this idea of like, is there something else about using that term that shuts people down, like that is intended subconsciously or consciously to say, this is how I feel when look, I could be completely wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I am. I think I'm correct about this.
You're correct in your lived reality?
No, I'm correct in my actual experience, which may or may not match up with reality.
Yes.
Is that my sense is that when people say that, they're saying it to say, I don't want to engage with you on the actual facts of what occurred. I want you to accept what I am saying as my experience, and not have any engagement about the actual facts of what may or may not have occurred. So I say that to say, I wonder if it's just not a way that our language in our society has polarized us. And to tie that back into our social media discussion, is that I know if I describe it in this way, because reality is a word that triggers like real, concrete, solid. It doesn't need
There's a definitive aspect.
Correct. It doesn't need a qualifier. So if I say my lived reality, I'm saying this is concrete, real, exact, and you can't challenge it because it is truth. As opposed to if I say my feelings about this situation or my experience in watching it allows for a back and forth.
That's interesting, because I was going to play devil's advocate and say, could it be that to say lived reality rather than shut down dialogue opens up the space for your experience to be different than mine, yours to be true and mine to be true, even if they don't exactly match up in the same experienced event? Well,
I'll acknowledge, because I actually think that you might be right. I don't think you are. I think you might be right. My point in bringing it up is, if I just say, hey, Kevin, my experience when I told you that I thought you were scared of X. And that was my perception of our conversation that we had on our last run. Mm-hmm. I may have overstepped my boundaries or my full understanding. I may have actually misunderstood your perspective, but my interpretation of that perspective was that you're afraid, and that's why you're doing this thing. And I think the way that conversation went and that conversation goes is, I'm telling you, this is my perspective of how you were reacting and how you were behaving toward a different reality, or like a true fact that occurred, or true things that occur in our space, right? And so I say, okay, this is how I'm interpreting that. I think that actually leads to more back and forth dialogue than if I say, my lived reality, Kevin, is that you are afraid. And like, to me, it seems like that wording would be less conducive to you coming back and saying, no, Chris, you're wrong. I'm not afraid. I'm this, right? I'm that. And I wonder if I approach things in that way, if it wouldn't allow for other give and take. And then in the broader sense of the term is, have we gotten to the point with social media and with some of these other things where if I use these terms, I know nobody can disagree with me. I can always be right.
Sure.
What do you think about that? I'm always right. Boom.
This is where you thank your sponsor and you're like, I'm done. We're good. This is the end of that podcast.
That's right. This is just getting good.
No, it's an interesting conundrum. Because it does. I mean, I can see what you're saying in terms of you're right, I'm right, we're both right, so that's it. In terms of that's your lived reality, this is my lived reality.
Yes.
So
we have no engagement.
So there's no need for a back and forth.
Correct. It's basically saying let's agree to disagree.
Yeah.
So let me actually,
which is we're trying to end an argument, right? So we'll just agree to disagree.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see what you're saying.
So I'm just curious if the words, and again, having not really thought through why I'm uncomfortable when I hear that.
Yeah.
Is it because I have no ability to engage with a person when I hear those terms? And you're saying, and I want to make sure, because again, I'm trying to engage with the way you're feeling, as opposed to playing devil's advocate. I'll go with you and say, do you really think that when you say it like that, somebody's lived reality, do you expect when you say that, do you expect that there to be any, like, there's actually more engagement in what that lived reality actually means in fact reality? Or is it easier to engage with somebody if I were to just say, these are my feelings about the situation, or this is my perspective about a situation?
This may or may not be sort of what you're describing. For me, at least, my experience in terms of talking about things that way and acknowledging other people's experiences from the perspective of their quote unquote lived reality is simply an acknowledgement of their own experience. What they observed, how they reacted, why their experience might be the way that it was, regardless of whether or not it is similar than mine, different than mine, something I agree with, something I disagree with. Just, that's what this was like for you.
Why can't we just say that?
Well, that's a great question, Chris. I don't know.
I mean, I don't know either. I don't know either. And I just wonder if it's not why I don't feel uncomfortable with it, is I don't feel comfortable with that term, and I don't know why. And to me, it almost, again, this could be my lived reality.
Yeah.
But when I hear that term, to me, it signals like, hey, I don't really want to talk about this. I just want you to accept what I'm saying and just be fine with it.
So what's interesting for me is my lived reality on this idea is that it is inviting dialogue.
That's interesting.
Because it's an acknowledgement of your experience, your perception may be different than mine, and I'm willing to sort of jump over to your perspective and understand it.
I probably need to. So I need to think about that. Then what I probably need to do is shift my perspective to when I hear that term, to try to lean into the conversation and engage more in the conversation, because maybe I'm just misunderstanding the use of it. And try to engage more in the conversation, because I actually feel like when that happens, I feel like, well, I can't go anywhere here. I can't explore those ideas, and maybe it's just my misunderstanding.
And to me, this is the beauty of dialogue.
Yeah,
because that's a perspective that I hadn't considered. But as you're describing it, I go, oh, that makes some sense. I get where Chris is coming from. I can wrap my head around that. Different perspectives. I'm not saying, I don't know which one's right or which one's wrong.
Yeah.
Like all things, I'm going to say it depends.
It's nature versus nurture.
That's right. I hope your listeners know that this is exactly how our runs go.
Yeah. I'm sure they'll never come on a run with us. Next time I ask somebody to work out at 5:15 in the morning, the answer is going to be nope.
No thanks.
Yeah. Well, I think I'll be respectful of your time. I've gone way over what I promised you we'd go. So maybe we'll continue this another time.
Yeah.
So thanks so much for being on. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.